You're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Ottoabasi, Abasiekong. This edition will discuss cost of living crisis in Nigeria, socio-economic implications, and policy options. Joining me virtually for this conversation is Dr. Muda Yusuf, an economist and the CEO of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. It's great to have you on the program, and happy new month to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let us begin with, of course, the hunger and end bad governance protests that have, of course, kickstarted since Thursday last week and it's gone across the country, painting a picture of a disconnect between government policies and an inclusive economy for citizens. From your perspective, what is the current state of the economy that has brought the country to this level?
Well, just as the theme of the protest says, it's about cost of living. The cost of living has been extremely very high. It has, contributed immensely to the level of poverty growth in the country. It has also created a lot of challenges for businesses in terms of even cost of doing business, which is also part of the total inflationary challenge that we are facing, cost of goods and services. It has also created challenges in terms of the fact that purchasing power is becoming increasingly very weak. And this is affecting, those who are in production because they produce. Many of them find it difficult to sell. Consumers are now prioritizing their purchases because of the high cost of living, because their real income has actually been significantly, eroded. So that is what has created all of these challenges that we are dealing with as we speak. And these are basically outcomes of some of the corrective reforms that the administration has tried to put in place. The key reforms essentially around, the foreign exchange convergence, around the fuel subsidy removal. These were the major things because this administration also inherited an economy that was in a very, very bad shape, an economy that was bleeding profusely, especially from the fuel subsidy regime and from the way we were managing the foreign exchange environment. So it makes sense that at the inception of the administration, this was a priority in terms of reforms. Unfortunately, these reforms had brought with it some very difficult pains in terms of the high cost of living, inflation arising from exchange rate depreciation, inflation arising from the high cost of energy. So that is what has brought us to this point. Whether the government will have reacted or responded differently to the outcomes of the social outcomes of those reforms, I think it's a different conversation.
Very, very important. Reforms have timelines. They have a short-term, medium-term, long-term effect, but communication is very important and the impact is very critical. But like you rightly said, the cost of living crisis has fueled the unrest across the country. And I mean, the discontent with government and its policies. And this, again, has led to the big question of how economic activities have been stalled by this ongoing protest that kicked off last week, Thursday. And like the CPPE had said, billions of naira will be lost due to the stall in economic activities and developments in the economy. But I just want to ask, what proactive steps we should have been taken regarding policy asymmetry to salvage the economy, considering what you've said? There have been some reforms, but at this stage, there must be steps. And there are demands from these groups, especially around the fuel subsidy and key issues around food security and things that the common man should be able to assess.
Well, the administration has taken some steps to mitigate the pains, because basically that is what is most important. Some steps have been taken around palliatives, Some steps have been taken around the CNG and all of that. But my view is that the response to the social outcomes of the reforms, first, there was the issue of how prompt the response was. That's the speed of the intervention. I think the response did not come quickly enough, to address the pains of the reform. And this has to do with, I think, the machinery of delivery of policy outcomes, of delivery in terms of implementation of what government desires to do. The president has made pronouncements around palliatives, measures to mitigate the pains. I mean, he has made these pronouncements close to a year, but the implementation did not follow immediately. So the citizens kept groaning, and unfortunately, the situation kept getting worse in terms of. So there is the issue of the promptness of the response of the intervention measures or the mitigation measures. Secondly, there's also the issue of the quality of the intervention. Because personally, I'm not a fan of palliatives, distributing palliatives to people and so on. This country is too large for that kind of approach. I'm a fan of using a policy approach so that the policy measures can reduce the cost of production, the cost of the operating cost, the production cost, in a manner that will cascade down through the market channels and bring down prices. These are measures that the government now decided to do, but that came rather late. I'm talking of the fiscal policy measures that have been announced within the framework of the economic stabilization plan. It was announced by the finance minister. So we wait and see how it comes out. With this protest now, I'm sure the protest has its value in terms of also reawakening the administration on the need to possibly even democratize the policy process so that we can have proper interrogation of the policies. We can look at the social dimension of the policy outcomes, and we decide how we should properly address them. I think that is one value that this, because at the end of the day, the economy is about human beings. It's about the people. And if the people are complaining so seriously about the outcomes of reforms, then I think it behooves on governments to see how it can respond appropriately and respond speedily. I think that is what is most important.
Yes. Now, Doctor, a very important part of unlocking economy is that public-private partnership. And my question to you is Nigeria open for business? And should the PPP model in the country be revisited? Because when you have that partnership, that nexus between public and private sector, it creates more jobs, it attracts investment, foreign direct investment, and activities go on. A lot of people are complaining about jobs, but are complaining about the fact that the cost of doing business, like you highlighted, is high. And again, the business CPPE, the NASIMA, and of course NECA, the top business groups have complained about the policy approach of this administration, that it needs to be business friendly.
Yeah, there are two issues here. There is the issue of creating a conducive environment for businesses so that we can see more investment, even independent of government. A situation where you attract more private sector capital into the economy. But we are talking about domestic private capital, we are talking about foreign private capital. So the policy environment, the regulatory environment, the security environment, the institutional environment, the macroeconomic environment, those things are very critical, to the attraction of private capital. Because the private sector capital is very critical to driving economic growth. Even in the development plan that we have, the private sector is expected to bring to the table about 85% of the resources for that development plan. But how will they bring it if the environment is not conducive? So there is the issue of the quality of the investment environment. on the dimensions that I've enumerated. So that is one. And the way to improve that is to strengthen engagement, so that we can further democratize the way we are managing the economy. But when you listen to the stakeholders, to be able to fine-tune your policies, to be able to know, what kind of policies can give you the best outcomes. So that is very critical. So there's the issue of independent investment by the private sector. Then there's the second leg of your question, which has to do with public-private partnership. Public-private partnership in terms of investment, particularly in infrastructure, is extremely very important because the government doesn't have all the resources, to deal with our infrastructure deficits. But in order to attract private sector investment into infrastructure space, we also need to create the right kind of environment because investing in infrastructure is a long-term investment. So the risk is higher. So the government has to come with policies to mitigate that risk. So that is why in many other climes, if the private sector is investing in long-term like infrastructure, that's what you call partial risk guarantee. The government doesn't need to guarantee the entire risk, but to select some risks that are not strictly business risk and give a guarantee. An example of that kind of risk is political risk. If something goes wrong in the political environment and it affects the investment, the government will be able to cover that kind of risk. Another important risk that needs to be covered is policy risk. If you are investing based on a particular prevailing policy environment, and government suddenly changes the policy and it's affecting your investment, the government should be able to cover that kind of risk. So there is a need for that partial risk guarantee to be able to encourage more private capital into public-private partnership projects. Because that is extremely very important. There's also the significance of respecting contractual agreements. Because if you look at our history with public-private partnership projects, not many of them have been successful. Because along the way, the government doesn't respect contractual agreements. Many private sector people that have brought in their funds for PPP, many of them have burnt their fingers. The Lekki-Epe Expressway, which used to be the model of PPP, at a point, they had to abandon it. Government had to take it over completely. The same thing we had the time we had the Virgin Nigeria. Yeah. It was a partnership between Nigeria and Virgin Atlantic.
Yes.
So we need to have that culture of respecting contractual agreements and the culture of giving guarantees to risks that are not business risk, so that will help us to unlock, a lot of private capital.
Yes. I mean, you've said it that there's need for that guarantees, political risk and policy risk. The protests are a major risk already for economic activities. If you see what transpired in Kano, Kaduna, and even across Gombe, states that are very pivotal to growth in the nation. Can you highlight some positives in terms of reforms from this government and areas that need improvement?
Well, the government has already undertaken some critical reforms. We have seen two major reforms: the foreign exchange reform, the fuel, oil and gas sector reform, and some incentives that have been given to gas investors. Those things are key. But again, the reform process is not perfect. That is why it is important to democratize the process, to engage stakeholders and get feedback on the reforms, on how to fine-tune it. And more importantly, is to look at the social consequences of reforms. Because when you relate with the models of IMF and World Bank, each time they talk about policy, they hardly talk about the social outcomes of policy. They're just looking at macroeconomic aggregates, GDP, exchange rate convergence, and all of that. Withdrawal of subsidy and all of that. They hardly talk about the social consequences.
Yeah.
So it is for us as a country, to ensure that the social consequences of policies are taken more seriously. So that is one big lesson from this protest. So that for me is very important. And we also need to look at how we can create a window to address issues of market failure in our financial system.
Mm.
There's no way you can invest in agriculture, in manufacturing, in real estate, the kind of interest rate that's failing now. And yet we need investment in those sectors. So we need a development finance window that is very robust, to allow people to invest in real sector, leveraging on the financing that is available. I mean, we're talking of interest rate now at around 30% or more. Just because we want to fight inflation. These are some of the models that I think we need to revisit, so that we are sure that we are doing things properly and getting the right kind of outcomes. We also need to look at the issue of stability of the exchange rate. I must commend the fact that the CBN has tried in the last 2 months or so to keep it reasonably within a band of 1,005, 550, getting close to 1. That's good, but we need to sustain it and keep it within a narrower band. Then the cost of cargo clearing, drastically, possibly to 1,000 or 800. It doesn't take anything away from the current reforms. If anything, it helps to lower the temperature in terms of the macroeconomic issues, social issues, inflation issues. The current exchange rate for the competition of imports is too high. And the CBN needs to do something about it. So these are some of the things I think the administration can do to respond to the current challenges, especially around the cost of living crisis.
Yeah. Doctor, in 1 minute, what's your word to households this period and businesses as we wrap up? I know that last time we talked, you raised the concerns about the cost of governance. Are you satisfied since then with the way this government is cutting down the cost of governance?
No. The government needs to do more with respect to the cost of governance. We need to do a lot more. After we discussed, that was when we even went and created another ministry for livestock and all of that. There's a need to cut down the cost of governance. And I believe that the government can benefit from the studies and research that budget did on our national budget. Because that organization had done a lot of study. They have looked at the budget, they have looked at duplications, they have looked at everything. Government can benefit from that and see where we can cut down a lot of expenses in our budget. So that we have a lot of work to do about cutting down the cost of governance, about also the right kind of messaging and signaling to show that, yes, we are in this sacrifice together. That is very important. The optics, the symbolism, the signaling, the messaging is very important. So that when people are even going through pain, they know that their leaders are also in
austere measures.
Yes, we need to be more austere about it. Yeah. So for the citizens, I think, even to the protesters first, I think the message has been passed. It has been effective. It has been very clear. The statement has been clear. I think at this time, they should just call off this protest and have an engagement with the government, so that we don't face the risk of further deterioration, that it will degenerate into anarchy. And I don't think anybody would like to see that, not even the organizers of the protest.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, for this very interesting conversation, looking at the cost of living crisis in Nigeria, and of course, the socio-economic implications and policy options. Thank you for your insights, as we hope that now that the protest, the demands have been heard loud and clear across the country, there will be a proper way of engagement, and government will be more proactive in addressing these knotty issues to move our country forward. Thank you once again for the time, Dr. Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, visit the Pro-Show website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage further on this show. Till we come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socio-economic developments around you, because it's a wise thing to do. Thank you. My name is Ottoabasi, and bye for now.